Hello there, my very good friends. Andy Murray for What Culture Wrestling here. And if, like me, you're a wrestling fan who exists on the internet, you will have heard the words I'm about to say, I don't know, at least a dozen times over in the past week alone, let alone the past few months. And hell, you might have even said them yourself. But either way, you cannot escape them. What are those words? Well, insert name here is biased towards AEW. This line and the many variations on it get trotted out in internet comment sections all the live-long bastard day. But, to be fair, I don't think it's anything compared to the straight-up bile that gets spewed at Dave Meltzer on Twitter every single day. Because when it comes to AEW and accusations of bias, nobody gets it worse than Big Daddy Dave. It's no secret, of course, that Melty is good friends with several members of the Elite. On top of this, he has appeared to discuss the AEW story as part of company canon as a talking head in various videos. And if you cast your mind back a few years ago, you will remember that it was his Twitter bet with Cody surrounding a non-WWE American wrestling promotion selling out a 10,000-seater venue that effectively accelerated All In and indeed AEW. This is all part of why Dave gets these accusations on Twitter all the goddamn time, and to be fair, AEW have opened up these accusations for themselves with their post-show media scrums as well. These scrums lead to more suspicious fans thinking that AEW are maybe trying to co-opt certain members of wrestling media, or perhaps they think that by AEW showing that they're willing to communicate face-to-face like Tony Khan does after every single pay-per-view, that it'll somehow lead to more favourable coverage. And, to be fair, AEW has received streams upon streams of favourable coverage since the promotion came to life, and that has only strengthened the resolve of those willing to cry bias at every sign of praise. But today, my very good friends, my argument is that AEW do not receive this praise because of bias, but because they have created organic stars and they've crafted storylines that a lot of people find compelling and logical. The product, so far, to the fans, has delivered. And because we're talking about bias here, let's just acknowledge first and foremost that taste is entirely subjective. You don't have to enjoy AEW, that is totally fine, because everyone has a preference and no preference is right or wrong. But for a second, let's talk about objective factors. Let's look at Cody as our first example. When that guy steps out on the average episode of Dynamite or any arena he walks into, he receives a hero's welcome. Then there's Chris Jericho, who receives a monstrous mixed star reaction. He gets comedy pops because the guy's so damn charismatic and funny, but at the same time, when he wants to turn it around, when he wants to get booed, he can bring a building to its knees. And then there's a guy like MJF, who on the episode of Dynamite after Full Gear was showered with bile and venom from every corner of the building. These reactions are a consequence of effective storytelling that's logical and makes sense. And it's all driven by the motivations and varying skill sets of the performers, putting them over as wrestlers, not just an act. Using a recent example, let's talk about the story between Jon Moxley and Kenny Omega, in which Moxley targeted the would-be ace of AEW and tried to rattle his confidence. In the build-up, we saw Jon reframe his entire New Japan G1 Climax run as study material ahead of the big match with Omega. So in response, Omega decided to enter Jon Moxley's world. He got booked in a lights-out, unsanctioned match against Joey Janela on that episode of Dark. And of course, in Dark's most revered match so far, Kenny won, and in the process, proved that he belonged in Moxley's domain. But at Full Gear, Omega bit off more than he could chew. He lost. Moxley proved himself a master of his own domain. And the reason Omega lost is quite simple. It's because he tried to channel his unrecoverable past by hitting his former partner Kota Ibushi's Phoenix Splash onto the exposed boards and missing completely. What Omega did was try to tap into a timeline in which he was confident, in which he was the best. He tried to fake it, and he lost. And so you see, the personality, the mindset, and the motivations of each character was factored into when mapping this storyline. And for the most part, it was reflected in the Full Gear match. And now that we've outlined that, how about a little comparison? Let's hop over to WWE for just a second. This is a promotion that seemingly ended the tedious automatic rematch clause earlier this year, and then, when the Revival lost the SmackDown Tag Team titles to the New Day, they just booked a rematch for the very next show without any kind of explanation. Another example, on the 4th of November 2019 episode of Raw, we saw Buddy Murphy overcome Cedric Alexander in a nice little mid-card match, and the very next week, it was Cedric who was the one who was given the opportunity to build momentum in a follow-up match with Andrade. Buddy, meanwhile, was nowhere to be found. Now, these things might seem minor in the grander scheme, but here's the thing, almost every single week of WWE programming throws them up. And as reviewers or critics or whatever the hell you want to call us, it is our job to not only answer those questions, those logical fallacies, but to explore the very weight of those answers. In these cases, there are no answers, so we ask more questions of the process. But is this bias? Bias is distinct from opinion because, by definition, bias is unfair prejudice. And the thing about WWE is that they have instilled these fair prejudices among wrestling fans through decades upon decades of examples like the ones I've just described. Say, for example, WWE and AEW both initiate a brand new push for a brand new wrestler on this week's TV. Now, we know that the AEW wrestler will be greeted with more optimism, while the WWE wrestler will receive more of a cynical reaction, because we know this company, through years and years and years of evidence, don't exactly have the best track record when it comes to things like this. Again, WWE's new act will be met with caution. People will be standing there saying, hey, how long will this thing really last, and how long will it be before WWE mess it up? While over on Dynamite, that hot new young prospect, whoever it may be, will be looked at in a more favourable light. Now, fundamentally, this is unfair, it's biased, but years of aborted developments have led us to this slanted vantage point. Cedric Alexander and Humberto Carrillo, for example, already feel like also-rans consigned to the mid-card. But over in AEW, you've got Darby Allin, who you just know is on the verge of taking off. AEW is still very much in a grace period. WWE, meanwhile, has created an entire roster of slightly over stars through years upon years of institutionalized booking problems. And that is why the two promotions are analyzed differently. WWE have decades upon decades of this stuff. This is what they are, we know what they are, and we know, if we're not naive about it, that they're probably not going to change anytime soon. AEW, meanwhile, well, it's a clean slate. But when it comes to AEW and WWE, even a robot couldn't be programmed to analyze even the most objective data in good faith. For example, let's contrast the difference in crowd volume. I think we can all say that's pretty objective. Well, what's the average episode of Raw or SmackDown? It sounds like a library. Watch Dynamite, meanwhile, and it's teeming with life and noise. So, on the basis of crowd volume, which is the objective measure when it comes to how well a wrestling promotion is promoting its wrestlers and storylines, AEW is audibly leaps ahead of the WWE main roster product. This is inarguable, because even when AEW mess with their sound mix a little bit, as they did for Full Gear, it's still a whole lot noisier than the average WWE production. And we constantly hear reports that USA Network aren't best pleased with Raw's ratings slump, while over on TNT, the Paymasters are very pleased with how Dynamite has overperformed so far, despite, the obvious numerical comparisons. And really, none of this is rocket science. AEW are succeeding for a reason, and WWE's audience has halved over the past 5 years for a reason. Because, as we know, AEW was created based on the desire to have an alternative. It only exists because WWE have driven off hordes upon hordes upon hordes of fans in recent years. And hey, you want to talk objectivity? Well, let's just take a look at what happens when a prominent wrestling critic attempts to devise an objective framework to rate the quality of a match on which personal taste has no bearing. What happens is that he is absolutely and relentlessly buried as an absolute weirdo, unable to keep his own story straight. And I am, of course, talking about Dave Meltzer. By many, his star rating system is considered inherently biased, even though he has attempted to set out a clear, objective framework, or as objective as it can be, based on things like psychology, technical precision, inventiveness, crowd heat, yada yada yada. The man himself has even said he prefers CMLL to watching New Japan, but he acknowledges that Kazuchika Okada, for example, has unparalleled storytelling and technical prowess in today's wrestling game. The star rating system is flawed, that much is true, and nobody's saying it isn't. But it is an earnest attempt at capturing the quality of a match, and yet people still far over the poor guy on Twitter all the time with "Hurdy would have been 6 stars in the Tokyo Dome, Dave," and all other forms of really crap banter. Because that's where objectivity gets you in today's wrestling world, and even citing it as an example of objectivity is sure to trigger hordes of bias callers from all corners of the internet. Now, of course, there is no tested, infallible, totally objective way of measuring quality in any art form. Taste and opinion, therefore, governs everything, even when it doesn't. Ultimately, it's all a matter of taste, and for full disclosure, I personally generally prefer AEW's vision of pro wrestling to WWE's sports entertainment. For an example of one of the reasons why, I prefer clean finishes to screwy ones. And that's an opinion, not bias. And the reason it isn't bias is because it isn't fixed, it isn't set in stone. Because when WWE do sports entertainment well, it's exceptional. Here's an example of that: Stephanie McMahon. I don't really like her as a televised performer, and I'm willing to bet that I'm not the only one among the viewership of this video, but I thought her performance at WrestleMania 34 was absolutely outstanding. The story was perfect, it was laid out perfectly, her timing was excellent, her facials were absolutely tremendous, and you know what? One of the reasons that Ronda Rousey's blitzkrieg, when she finally got in the ring and finally got her hands on the dastardly villains, well, it had a lot to do with Stephanie McMahon. That is what pro wrestling is all about, and myself and millions of fans around the world were able to take joy from the performance of a wrestler we don't always tend to care for, even though on the night, she was tremendous. And unfortunately, examples like that are something WWE just haven't done enough of in recent years, and it is shown by declining trends in every single consumer-driven metric. Now, AEW isn't perfect, and when it isn't perfect, we call it out. I personally have written in-depth criticisms on all kinds of things on our website, on Jim Ross's grumpiness on commentary, on the over-reliance of Spotfest in the tag division, on the ineffectiveness of the women's division so far. But such criticism is rarely acknowledged because too many tribal loyalists have a pre-existing determination to reflexively bury any praise thrown at something they don't like. And you know what that is, don't you? It's bias. Ultimately, I hope all of this contributes in a positive way to how we discuss pro wrestling going forward. Let's abandon the tribalism, let's abandon the blind loyalty, and let's stop getting all worked up and throwing daft little words beginning with B around when something that maybe personally we aren't that fond of gets praise from people who are fond of it. It's all just getting really, really silly, and honestly, it's putting a downer on what is really a wonderful time to be a pro wrestling fan. So let's just give it a rest, eh? And remember, hey, it's fine if you don't like AEW, it's fine if you prefer NXT, Raw, SmackDown, or any other show, but let's have a conversation about it rather than throwing silly little buzzwords around. But anyway, folks, I've waffled on long enough. My take is done. Now it's time for you to throw yours down in the comment section below. Once you've done that, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You can ring the bell for notifications. Then you can follow us on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE, and you can follow me at Andy H. Murray, where you can call me biased and tell me how wrong I am. Bye!